I, 28F, never thought I'd find myself in this situation. But here I am, struggling with a dilemma that's been weighing on me for weeks. It all started when I met Josh, 32M, at a friend's barbecue last month. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of indie films and obscure 80s music. As we talked, I found myself drawn to his warm smile and kind eyes. Josh and I exchanged numbers that day and started texting regularly. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, covering everything from our favorite books to our dreams for the future. After a week of chatting, he asked me out on a proper date. I was excited but also a bit nervous. It had been a while since I'd put myself out there romantically. Our first date was at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown. Josh arrived with flowers and pulled out my chair. Such a gentleman. Throughout dinner, he was attentive and engaging. We talked for hours, losing track of time as we shared stories about our lives. I learned that Josh worked as an architect and volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. His passion for both his career and giving back to the community was really attractive to me. As the weeks went by, Josh and I continued seeing each other regularly. He planned thoughtful dates like picnics in the park and visits to art galleries. I appreciated how he always made an effort to do things I enjoyed. Josh was unfailingly kind and supportive, especially when I opened up about some of my past relationship struggles. He listened without judgment and offered words of encouragement. The more time we spent together, the more I enjoyed Josh's company and personality. He had a great sense of humor and always knew how to make me laugh after a long day. I loved how passionate he got when talking about architecture or animal welfare. His enthusiasm was contagious. However, I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't particularly physically attracted to Josh. He wasn't conventionally handsome, and there wasn't much of a spark when we touched or kissed. I tried to tell myself that looks weren't everything and that his wonderful personality more than made up for it. After all, I'd dated hot guys in the past who turned out to be jerks. Maybe this was a sign I needed to focus on what really mattered in a partner. About a month into dating, Josh and I went out for drinks one evening. We both had a few cocktails and were feeling relaxed. As we walked back to my apartment, he pulled me close and kissed me deeply. It was the first time we'd really made out, and I have to admit it felt a bit awkward. There wasn't much chemistry, but I chalked it up to nerves and kept going with it. When we got to my place, things started heating up. As we were kissing on the couch, Josh suddenly pulled back. He looked uncomfortable and said he needed to tell me something. My mind raced, wondering what it could be. Josh took a deep breath and explained that he dealt with erectile dysfunction. He assured me it wasn't a big deal. He just needed to take medication and he'd be fine next time. I was caught off guard but tried to be understanding. I told Josh I appreciated his honesty and that it didn't change how I felt about him. Inside, though, I felt conflicted. On one hand, I admired his vulnerability in sharing this with me. On the other, I worried about what it might mean for our physical relationship going forward. The next week, Josh came over to my place for dinner and a movie. We both knew sex was probably on the table this time. I was nervous, but also curious to see how things would go. As we started kissing and touching, I noticed Josh seemed tense. When clothes started coming off, it became clear he was having trouble getting and staying aroused. What followed was honestly one of the most awkward sexual encounters of my life. Josh couldn't maintain an erection, even though he said he'd taken his medication. He seemed frustrated and embarrassed. I tried to be encouraging, but nothing seemed to help. After a while, we both gave up. The relief was palpable. In the days since, I've been grappling with how to move forward. Josh is truly a wonderful guy in so many ways. He's kind, supportive, and we have a great connection. But the lack of sexual chemistry is hard to ignore. I worry about committing to a relationship where physical intimacy might always be a struggle. To complicate things further, Josh opened up to me about how his last relationship ended because of his ED issues. Apparently, his ex-girlfriend ended up cheating on him, claiming she needed sex. Part of me understands her frustration, even though I'd never condone cheating. I'm at a loss for what to do. Is it shallow to consider ending things over this? Should I give it more time? I care about Josh and don't want to hurt him, but I also have needs and desires in a relationship. Any advice on how to navigate this situation would be greatly appreciated. I'm really struggling with what the right thing to do is here. Update 1. It's been a few weeks since my last post, and I wanted to provide an update on the situation with Josh. After much deliberation, I decided to have an open and honest conversation with him about my concerns regarding our physical intimacy. I knew it wouldn't be an easy talk, but I felt it was necessary for both of us. I invited Josh over to my place one evening, making sure we had plenty of time and privacy to discuss things. When he arrived, I could tell he sensed something was up. We sat down on the couch, and I took a deep breath before diving in. I started by telling Josh how much I valued our connection and enjoyed spending time with him. I emphasized all the qualities I admired about him. his kindness, intelligence, and sense of humor. Then I gently broached the subject of our physical relationship. I explained that while I understood ED was a medical issue, I was worried about the impact it might have on our long-term compatibility. Josh listened intently, his expression a mix of sadness and understanding. When I finished speaking, he thanked me for my honesty. He admitted that he'd been struggling with how to address the elephant in the room. Josh then opened up about his history with ED in a way he hadn't before. Apparently, Josh had been dealing with erectile dysfunction since his early 20s. He'd seen multiple doctors and tried various treatments over the years, but nothing seemed to provide a consistent solution. The issue had taken a major toll on his self-esteem and previous relationships. Josh confessed that he often felt like less of a man because of his inability to perform sexually. Hearing Josh's vulnerability and pain, I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. I realized how much courage it must have taken for him to keep putting himself out there romantically, knowing the challenges he faced. We talked for hours that night, delving deep into our fears, insecurities, and hopes for the future. By the end of our conversation, we both felt emotionally drained, but also closer than ever. Josh and I agreed that we cared about each other enough to keep trying to make things work. He promised to be more proactive about exploring treatment options, including therapy to address the psychological aspects of his ED. I committed to being patient and supportive as we navigated this challenge together. Over the next couple of weeks, Josh and I focused on building intimacy in non-sexual ways. We had long talks, cuddled while watching movies, and gave each other massages. It was nice to connect physically without the pressure of sex looming over us. I found myself appreciating Josh's gentle touch and the way he always seemed to know when I needed a hug. However, I'd be lying if I said all my doubts disappeared. There were still moments when I wondered if I was setting myself up for disappointment down the road. I couldn't help thinking about Josh's ex who had cheated, and whether I might eventually feel the same frustration she did. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of all the wonderful qualities Josh possessed. As we continued dating, I noticed small positive changes. Josh seemed more relaxed and confident when we were intimate, even if things didn't always go as planned. He started opening up more about his insecurities, which in turn made me feel closer to him. I realized that this journey was bringing us together in unexpected ways. Still, questions lingered in the back of my mind. Could I truly be fulfilled in a relationship where traditional sex might always be a struggle? Was I strong enough to handle the challenges that lay ahead? Only time would tell. But for now, I was cautiously optimistic about our future together. Update 2. It's been about 2 months since my last update, and a lot has happened in that time. Josh and I continued working on our relationship, both emotionally and physically. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in sexual health issues, which seemed to be helping him address some of the psychological aspects of his ED. We also experimented with different approaches to intimacy. We focused on lots of foreplay and explored ways to pleasure each other that didn't rely solely on penetration. Some attempts were more successful than others, but we always made an effort to keep things light and maintain a sense of humor about it all. Despite our best efforts, I still found myself struggling at times. There were nights when I'd lie awake, wondering if I was fooling myself by thinking this could work long-term. I cared deeply for Josh, but the lack of satisfying physical intimacy was starting to wear on me. About a month ago, Josh and I had a breakthrough of sorts. We'd been out to dinner and came back to my place, feeling relaxed and connected. As we started kissing on the couch, things heated up naturally. To both our surprise, Josh was able to maintain an erection without medication. We ended up having sex, and while it wasn't mind-blowing, it felt like a huge step forward. Afterward, Josh was elated. He said he felt more confident than he had in years. I was happy for him and hopeful that maybe we'd turned a corner. However, a small part of me couldn't help but feel that the sex itself had been somewhat lackluster. I pushed that thought aside, not wanting to dampen Josh's excitement. Over the next few weeks, our sex life improved somewhat. Josh was able to get aroused more easily, though maintaining it was still hit or miss. We were intimate more frequently, which was nice, but I found myself wishing for more passion and intensity. Then, about 2 weeks ago, something unexpected happened. I was at a work conference out of town and ran into my ex-boyfriend, Mark, 30M. We'd dated for a year in college and had always had explosive chemistry. Seeing him brought back a flood of memories. Mark and I ended up grabbing drinks to catch up. One drink turned into several, and before I knew it, we were back in my hotel room. The sex was incredible, passionate, intense, and deeply satisfying in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. The next morning, I was overwhelmed with guilt. I'd never cheated on anyone before and couldn't believe I'd done this to Josh. At the same time, being with Mark had reminded me of what I'd been missing in my physical relationship with Josh. I flew home feeling confused and conflicted. Part of me wanted to confess everything to Josh immediately. Another part wondered if I should end things with him, knowing now that I wasn't fully satisfied. And a small, selfish part considered keeping the affair a secret and potentially seeing Mark again. For the past 2 weeks, I've been grappling with what to do. Josh has noticed that I've been distant and keeps asking if everything is okay. I feel terrible for lying, but I'm paralyzed by indecision. I care about Josh deeply and don't want to hurt him, but I also can't shake the feeling that I deserve a relationship with both emotional and physical fulfillment. I'm at a crossroads and don't know which path to take. The guilt is eating me alive, but so is the fear of potentially giving up a great guy for something as shallow as sexual satisfaction. Any advice on how to proceed would be greatly appreciated. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update, and I'm still reeling from everything that's happened. After weeks of internal struggle, I finally decided to come clean to Josh about my infidelity. I knew it would be painful, but I couldn't continue living with the guilt and deceit. I invited Josh over to my apartment, my heart pounding as I prepared to shatter the trust we'd built. When he arrived, looking concerned about my recent distant behavior, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Taking a deep breath, I launched into my confession. I told Josh everything, about running into Mark at the conference, the drinks, and what happened afterward. I explained how conflicted I'd been feeling about our physical relationship, and how the encounter with Mark had brought those feelings to the surface. Throughout my explanation, Josh sat in stunned silence, his face a mix of shock, hurt, and anger. When I finished speaking, the silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Josh spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked if I'd been unhappy all along, if everything we'd built had been a lie. The pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that I cared for him deeply but had been struggling with our physical compatibility. Josh listened, but I could see him shutting down emotionally. He stood up abruptly, saying he needed time to process everything. As he left my apartment, I felt a mixture of relief at having told the truth and devastation at the pain I'd caused. For the next week, I didn't hear from Josh. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the guilt and uncertainty. When he finally reached out, it was to say he wanted to meet and talk things through. We met at a neutral location, a quiet park near both our homes. Josh looked tired and defeated, nothing like the cheerful, confident man I'd first met. He told me he'd done a lot of thinking and had come to a difficult decision. While he cared for me, he didn't think he could move past my infidelity. Moreover, he realized that he needed to focus on himself and his own healing before he could be in a healthy relationship. I listened, tears streaming down my face. Despite the pain of the moment, I knew Josh was right. We'd both been trying so hard to make things work that we'd lost sight of our own needs and happiness. As we said our goodbyes, there was a sense of finality that broke my heart but also felt oddly freeing. In the weeks since our breakup, I've done a lot of soul-searching. I've realized that while Josh was a wonderful person, our relationship had been built on shaky ground from the start. I had ignored my own needs and desires, convincing myself that his great personality could overcome our lack of physical chemistry. I've also grappled with my actions and the person I became in this situation. Cheating went against everything I thought I believed in, and I'm still working on forgiving myself. I've started seeing a therapist to work through my feelings and understand why I made the choices I did. As for Mark, I haven't seen or spoken to him since the conference. While the physical connection was undeniable, I recognize that it was born out of my own dissatisfaction and doesn't necessarily mean we'd be compatible in a real relationship. Looking ahead, I'm focusing on healing and growing as a person. I'm learning to be more honest with myself about my needs and desires in a relationship. While the experience with Josh was painful, it taught me valuable lessons about compatibility, communication, and the importance of not settling in matters of the heart. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm committed to being true to myself and my partners moving forward. The road ahead may be uncertain, but I'm hopeful that with time and self-reflection, I'll find a relationship that fulfills me both emotionally and physically.